This is the High School Crossfire. Welcome back.
I think Team Negative must understand one thing. In a family, mostly the stubborn boys, no matter how stubborn he is, will most likely listen to their mother more than the father. This is not an accident. The mother takes things slow and shows the son that you are big, right? But the father who uses force, most times the father will also be beaten because the son wants to prove how big he is. But diplomacy will always work because the son will listen to the mother anyways. It is hard, but they are also mothers. So let's talk about human rights. They think when human rights are violated, or maybe when a country is making nuclear bombs, by the time a country violates international law, that means it has considered all sanctions that could happen and is no longer afraid of them. By the time Russia attacks Ukraine, that means it already knows that NATO, things like USA, they can sanction it anyways, but if it goes ahead to attack, that means it's not afraid of the sanctions and can just push forward even with the sanctions. Things like North Korea worked because they had dialogue, the people sat on a round table. We think their war doesn't work. Then they also think internal pressure will work, but we think it won't work, but will work more in our case. Look at the scenario like this. So for example, we pressure people in Russia to attack Ukraine more. You want to tell a person of Ukraine that it is Russia which is causing the problem, yet Russia attacked him because you sanctioned it. So at the end of the day, people trace the problem to the person causing it. And the person causing it is the person who has accelerated the war. So if you sanction them and those people decided to kill those people, at the end of the day, it won't work. They bring a contradiction. These people say these people are going to suffer and comply. But the same people argue that these wars are taking place in particular areas or certain areas. So they can always get support from the other areas anyways. And even if they don't get them from other areas, they are always allies, right? When Russia attacked Ukraine, all countries did not stand with America. Some countries stood with Russia. So at the end of the day, even other countries suffer in the long run. Why is this bad for dialogue? Let's say, for example, Uganda decides to stand with Russia. Russia has already got a supporter. It has got China. That means dialogue becomes hard. It no longer cares about the sanctions because it can deal with them. It can work with its allies and counteract those sanctions anyways. So we think it is bad if it brings alliances that increases the tension that would have been solved in affirmative case. Two, they also come and say things like being postponed and stuff. We think even if being postponed won't happen because we proved urgency. When there is a fight, both parties are suffering. I think it is bad to come and say Russia attacking Ukraine, it is only Ukraine that is suffering. Even Russian people are suffering. So urgency is already there. All the parties want dialogue. But what you must understand, calm down, what you must understand is that the country wants to prove superiority. So if it wants to prove superiority and you want to show it that it is inferior, it will also prove its superiority. So at the end of the day, you are going nowhere. And as my speaker said, you still resort to diplomacy. So why not go for diplomacy in the first place, right? Then they also come and say, the suffering, right? We think the people who suffer in the end are the Russians, not people like Vladimir Putin. So Putin is not being affected by the sanction on rice anyways. You'll eat chicken whether you share sanction or not. So the leaders can always push forward anyways. And internal pressure won't work because the people will still blame the country that put the sanctions. So the people are most likely going to be inclined to support their government because they think their government is being oppressed by an outside country. So the people will still support their government anyways because most of the Russians still support Vladimir Putin anyways. Then they come and say rigidity, which you have proven. If a person is rigid and wants to prove superiority, the best measure you can take is tell him you are superior, bro, but this is not what you should do anyways. Then they also come and the time factor, they still rules on that. I'll take you.
Did talking to Vladimir Putin actually make him to concede?
They do not understand that they are the causes of the problem. They did not talk to Vladimir Putin, but they wanted to show him how big they are. NATO just put sanctions. America agreed with NATO and put sanctions. No one wanted to talk to Russia, and Russia did what it did. And we still have the war anyways. So I think they are the cause anyways. Then they talk of things like, if a person gives you a punch, what should you respond? They say there is no other alternative, but we think you have two alternatives. You either ask him why he has punched you, and that's what we think is effective dialogue. But if you punch back, then that is a fight, not dialogue. Dialogue can only be started by words, not by punches. Then let's go on. Things like nuclear weapons are things we cannot joke with anyways. If a country is making nuclear weapons and your take is to put sanctions on them, as they agree that the leaders are rigid, we cannot risk another Hiroshima and Nagasaki anyways, and we think we should go with affirmative. Then things like time are things we cannot waste when people are dying. Because when you put sanctions, more people people die. We don't think the way to save people is by making more of them die, and we think our idea works better. Thank you.
Now, firstly, we would like to thank these guys here about their initiative, their jungles and mothers and fathers. But we have to understand that we're talking about international issues right now, and they should be a bit more serious with their intuition pumps. Now, another thing we have to clearly detail that they have failed to actually complete what their burden stimulates them to do. Their burden in this debate is to actually show us that economic sanctions undermine effective dialogue. But instead, what have they come up and done? They've actually come up and just told us about how diplomatic solutions are a better option. They have not completed their burden at that in any way. Now, dear panel, let's just take the alternative, diplomatic solutions. They come up and tell us, you know what, instead we are supposed to have diplomacy. But dear panel, economic sanctions are an alternative for diplomacy. By the time you're not going to economic sanctions, you have already talked to these rigid leaders. You already talked to these rigid leaders and they have failed to adapt. That's when they start looking into sanctions. We asked them about Putin. They had already talked about to Putin before they started putting these economic sanctions into place. They get it all wrong there. Now, they also come and continue talking about urgency, about how we are undermining urgency. But really, as their diplomatic solutions, alternative, as people are dying, instead you're sitting and holding meetings with these leaders who continue to go and kill other people in other countries, and you really think at that point in time diplomatic solutions are a better option? What are these people thinking? Honestly, they are the ones who are undermining urgency. Now, the next thing that you present to us is that, you know what, sanctions being placed on the people, these people are killing others. As you place economic sanctions, these people are actually killing others. Yes, they are actually killing others, but in the end, what happens? You're killing people, and what happens? You people are dying. So what? There is some kind of internal pressure. There is already external pressure from the United Nations, but now there is more internal pressure. Your citizens are dying. What do you do as a leader? And you have to understand that leaders are circulator. These leaders are not single leaders. There is a council of advisors. They're seeing and they're analyzing the war. They're seeing and analyzing the problem. And that is when they advise them to actually reduce the war to Kiev. That is where they fail to understand on this. Now, another thing they come and talk about rigidity of leaders. Yes, we agree that they are rigid leaders. Putin is a rigid leader. There are so many rigid leaders. But at the end of the day, not only one leader is making the decisions. There is a whole council of people, advisors. At the end of the day, these leaders actually have what it takes to analyze what is going on and see that people are dying. At the end of the day, what happens? Pressure then determines that there's going to be effective dialogue, that they're going to have to reduce the war. This is what we are seeing right now in status quo. And they fail to understand it again. Now, the next thing they come on is talking about acceleration of war. I don't know why they keep on painting acceleration of war with economic sanctions. But firstly, we give you the example of Russia and reduction to Kiev. How then are you going to continue telling us that the acceleration of war, yet it's actually effective dialogue? And now the only example they give us is North Korea. North Korea. But at the end of that day, North Korea didn't compromise weapon manufacture because of diplomacy. They compromised this because actually they were putting sanctions on them, and that is proven. They could research later if they want to do that. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is allies. They continuously come and talk about allies. Now, these allies, they come and give us an example of, you know what, Russia is going to have allies with China, but there's what they call comparative advantage. No nation produces what they think other nations are going to give another nation. You produce what you have and you give them that. So at a point in time, when Russia then loses China, they're losing that thing. But you have to understand that no man is an island. Every country is actually depending on so many countries. Trade is interdependent. You lose one ally, but you have one ally, but you're losing how many others? 10. You're losing France, Russia, you're losing other countries in the UN Permanent Secretary that actually don't want to see this war happening. At the end of the day, their point does not stand, because when you lose one country, you're actually losing other allies with other countries. When you're losing other allies, what happens then? You're seeing that your economy is going down, and then you're actually then going to stop the war. Pano, this is what they call effective dialogue. And now, the other example they come and give us is genocide, the Rwandan genocide. The Hutu and the Tutsi. Really, how can you start bringing up such country issues in one single country when we are discussing international issues? There could not be economic sanctions on such places because there were internal conflicts. We are talking about wars between countries. We are talking about one country affecting the other. There are examples throughout this debate. Other than that, their mother, their father, their jungle, they do not make sense in any way at all, their panel. Now, I want to do one more thing. I want to come and tell you what their burden was for us. We were simply to show that effective dialogue actually does not undermine, that economic sanctions do not undermine effective dialogue. How? We clearly show you that it puts pressure on them. You're losing labor, you're losing infrastructure, you're losing allies, you're losing raw materials from these other people, these other countries that don't want to see you continuing with such a conflict. And then what happens? They then put an economic sanction on you, what happens then? You're then more willing to comply. At the end of the day, we continuously see, using previous examples, using North Korea, using Russia, this is actually effective dialogue. They fail to understand that, and at the end of the day, Team Up takes this debate. Thank you.
This is the High School Crossfire. We'll be back in a minute.